Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn, and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. Around 9:30 p.m. on January 20th, 1998, the Crowe family was getting ready to go to bed. The family members in the home were the parents, Steve and Cheryl, the grandmother, Judith Kennedy, and the three children, Michael, who was 14, Stephanie, who was 12 years old, and Shannon, who was 10 years old. As the family all snuggled into bed and got ready to fall asleep, the family was unaware that numerous of their immediate neighbors had been calling 911. There was a man who was going up to the houses in the Crowe family's neighborhood, and he was knocking on doors, and he kept asking for someone named Tracy. And he was trying to get into people's homes. And in one case, he actually did get into a woman's home. She answered the door and he asked if Tracy was there. This woman obviously had no idea what he was talking about, and he just walked right in her house. She was able to get the man to leave her home, and she immediately called 911, as well as I've mentioned numerous neighbors had called 911 about this suspicious man trying to get into their home. And this takes place in Escondido, California. So the police arrive in the neighborhood and they talk to a couple of the neighbors and they kind of look around and they can't locate this man. One police officer would witness something that at the time seemed completely insignificant, but would go on to have great significance later. When the Crowe family had gone to bed that night, they had no idea that they were going to wake up to their worst nightmare. The next morning, January 21st, 1998, the grandmother, Judith Kennedy, she could hear Stephanie's alarm clock going off. And Stephanie is the 12-year-old daughter. And the grandmother thought it was strange because Stephanie was a really responsible young girl. And the grandmother couldn't really figure out why her alarm was going off. So the grandmother decided to go to her room to turn off the alarm clock. When the grandmother got to Stephanie's room, she let out a blood-curdling scream that woke up both Steve and Cheryl, the parents, and they came running. 12-year-old Stephanie was laying dead on her bedroom floor. She had been stabbed to death while all of her family members slept close by. Steve, the father, immediately called 911. The police arrived very shortly afterwards, and as soon as the police saw what had happened to Stephanie, they gathered up the family members and they took them all to the police station. The first thing the police did when they got the family to the police station was to separate the entire family. Steve, the father, he understood that the police needed to question him. He knew that, common sense, if somebody is murdered in a home, most likely it's done by someone else in the home. So he was very cooperative with the police. He was extremely distraught and trying his best to provide the police with as much information as possible. But he was also very concerned not only about his daughter who had died, but he was very concerned about his two other children, Michael, 14, and Shannon, 10. So police kept saying to Michael, well, we need to question you. And Michael pleaded with the police, please just don't leave my children alone. Please let them either be with their mother or with their grandmother. Please just don't have them alone, because he was very concerned with how his children were coping with this. And the police promised Michael that the two children would not be separated from the mother or the grandmother. This was a complete lie. The children had already been separated from Cheryl and from Judith. And this was the very beginning of the manipulation and horrific treatment that this family would suffer at the hands of a completely incompetent police force. And a lot of times in true crimes, we are always pointing out the cases where police are incompetent. Obviously, there's a lot of wonderful police officers who are very good at their jobs and, they handle things and do things correctly. Unfortunately, in this case, it was just utter, unexplainable incompetence that makes absolutely zero sense. When questioned, all of the 5 surviving family members gave the exact same story. The family had gone to bed around 9:30 and nobody had heard anything throughout the night, and the body was discovered right before they had called 911. Michael, the 14-year-old brother, told police that he had woken up around 4 a.m. and he had gone to the kitchen to get some Tylenol because he had a headache. The reason why this matters so much is that for Michael to get from his bedroom to the kitchen, he has to walk past Stephanie's bedroom. And police believe, based on their estimation at her time of death, that she would have already been dead at this point. So police are saying, well, how did you walk past her bedroom and you didn't notice that she was lying dead on the floor? And I don't know about you, but if I wake up in the middle of the night and I need to go to the bathroom or get a glass of water or get Tylenol or whatever, I get up and go and do things. I don't turn lights on. I'm not looking around. It's like, go do what you need to do and get back to bed. So to me, I don't find it strange at all that if he walked past, and he did tell them that he didn't turn any lights on. So to me, I don't think it's suspicious at all that he had walked past her bedroom and not looked in and saw her on the floor in the dark when he's half asleep. But police really, really thought this was extremely significant. Police also claimed that they didn't feel like Michael was showing the same amount of emotions as the other family members. This is a 14-year-old child, and on this channel, we talk about some pretty crazy 14-year-olds and much younger children who do horrific crimes. But for the average 14-year-old to wake up in the morning, see his sister stabbed to death, being separated from his parents, who's to say what is and what isn't an appropriate response? Because it wasn't as though he was acting strangely, like he was happy or, acting very strangely and suspiciously. They just didn't feel he was showing enough emotion. But this poor kid is probably in shock and has no idea what's going on. After the police had finished questioning the family, they still were not allowing the family to have contact with each other. The parents were allowed to have contact with each other. So Cheryl and Michael and Judith, the grandmother, they're all allowed to communicate with each other, and they go and stay at a hotel. The 2 children are put in a shelter for child protective services, and they're allowed to talk to each other, the 14-year-old Michael, the 10-year-old Shannon, but they're not allowed to talk to their parents. The parents aren't allowed to communicate with the kids. And this goes on for 2 days. So this family had woken up in the morning to see their daughter, granddaughter, and sister stabbed to death. And now the family has been ripped apart. And it's just so heartbreaking. Police obviously also are going through the house. And one thing they notice is there's no sign of forced entry. And in a lot of situations, if there's no sign of forced entry, that's usually something that's very significant. The only reason why it doesn't really have a lot of significance in this case is that there were multiple ways in the house that you didn't have to force entry. There were doors and windows unlocked. So what we know for sure is there were 2 doors to the house that were unlocked, and Stephanie's bedroom window was unlocked. So the first point of entry that they look at is Stephanie's bedroom window because it was unlocked. But the screen to her window was still in place and did not look like it had been disturbed in any way. Also, there was kind of dirt and debris outside of her window that if somebody would have crawled through that window, this would have disturbed this dirt and debris that was outside the window. So police very quickly say, okay, this is not how they got it. If somebody did get in the house, this is not how they got in. Then there was a door to the parents' bedroom. They had a double glass door that opened up right into their bedroom. So these 2 doors were unlocked, but they had metal blinds that were in front of both of the doors. So if somebody was to have entered the house through those doors, first of all, they're entering the house directly into the parents' bedrooms, but also the blinds being metal, it would have made noise. So it doesn't seem likely that they would have entered through the parents' bedroom because first of all, they've got to get past the blinds without waking up the parents. Then they've got to walk through the parents' room while they're sleeping and not wake them up. So that seemed like an unlikely scenario. The other door that was opened in the house was a door that led to the garage. So there's the big garage door, but then there's just, a regular door that you open and walk through. And to get into the house, the door leading into the house was unlocked. So somebody could have just gone up to the garage, opened the door, and gotten in the house. So if somebody had gotten in the house that night, most likely this would have been the door that they used. So remember how I said there were all the 911 calls and police had witnessed something that didn't seem significant at the time, but could have great significance? One police officer who had responded to all of these 911 calls had seen someone close that garage door. Now, when the police officer saw the door closed, the police officer didn't see the person who closed the door. He just saw the door being closed. And he would have naturally probably assumed that, 911 is being called by all these neighbors. There's commotion going on and the police are outside. So they just assumed it was a neighbor who opened their door to look outside thinking, what's going on around me? And then closed the door. So the entry point to the home that would most likely have been used if this was committed by someone who had entered the home, a police officer had seen someone close that door as they were there looking for a man who was trying to get into people's homes, and the police never found him that night. And also what's important is that the Crowe family were very specific in saying that they had gone to bed at 9:30. So the Crowe family, if everything that they're saying is true, would have been in bed asleep when this door was closed. Something's looking super sus. But the police don't think so. At this point, the police are 100% convinced that Michael, the 14-year-old brother, is the one who committed this murder. The only problem is there is absolutely zero evidence that he had anything to do with this. So what are the police going to do? Move on and look at another suspect, possibly the man who was trying to get into people's homes the night before? No. They're going to create evidence in the form of a coerced confession. So we're going to get into Michael's interrogation in a few minutes. But first of all, let's talk about this weird man who was trying to get into people's homes the night before Stephanie was killed. His name was Richard Raymond Tutti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's Tuite. I went to try to see, because sometimes I pronounce things wrong. So I tried to look up the pronunciation, and I kept being told the pronunciation was either tu or tutu. So I don't know. We're going to call him Richard Raymond. But Richard Raymond, regardless of how you pronounce his last name, he is a homeless man who is schizophrenic. He did have an ex-girlfriend named Tracy who had lived in the area. The police brought him in the next day and questioned him for about 30 minutes. They also took his clothing, and they noticed a large cut on his hand. So very often when somebody kills someone else by stabbing, they very often have cuts on their hands. They usually have a bunch of cuts. It depends on how many times they actually stabbed the person. But in this case, she was stabbed 9 times. So it would be most likely that the killer would have a cut on his hand, which Richard Raymond does. So police don't know the exact time of death, but based on Stephanie's body, when she was found, police could tell that she had been dead for quite a long time when she was discovered. So you now have this homeless man who is trying to get into all of the neighbors' houses. 911 is called. He has a lengthy police record, but they don't think he's suspicious at all. The police claim this man is too crazy. He could not have committed this crime. This is what the police decide. They do take Richard Raymond's clothing that he was wearing that day, and that will come up again. So just remember, he was interviewed very quickly, 30 minutes. Police are like, nah, couldn't have been him. But they did take his clothing. The family as well, when they had been questioned, their clothes had been taken and their bodies had also been examined for injuries, and there were no significant injuries on any of the family members. So we have the 2 children in a shelter for children, and the parents are at a motel and they have no contact with each other. Now the dad, Steve, he has not even considered that the police are suspicious of the children. He also is completely unaware that for these 2 days where the police separated the parents and the children, the police had interviewed Michael for most of those 2 days. So Michael, 14, is being interrogated by police. He has no parents. His parents aren't even aware that he's being interrogated. He has no lawyer, and he has given up his Miranda rights. And all of that is legal. Now, in my opinion, I find it very strange that a 14-year-old could give up their Miranda rights, because to me, does a 14-year-old even really understand what their Miranda rights are? And I think at 14, there's sort of different levels of understanding in kids. Some kids at 14 are very mature and maybe have more of an understanding, but then there's also 14-year-old kids who are very innocent and sweet and may not really know that much about this. And to me, it seems as though Michael was more in that kind of innocent outlook for a 14-year-old. The big controversy in this case is Michael Crowe's interrogation. Michael Crowe was interrogated for 2 days. He had told the police hundreds of times in his interrogation that he did not do this and he had no idea who had done this. And police also lied to Michael. And we know that police are allowed to lie to suspects. But to me, at 14, I don't know that a 14-year-old would necessarily understand that police are allowed to lie to them. I don't think most adults even realize that police are allowed to lie to them. Police tell Michael that they found Stephanie's blood in his bedroom. And when they tell Michael this, Michael is completely shocked. And police are saying, well, how did the blood get in your room? There was no blood in Michael's room, first of all. Just to be clear, there is absolutely, and never was any evidence that Michael did this. Everything that the police are saying is evidence is just fantasy that they've created to try to coerce a confession out of Michael. So they tell him they found blood in his room. Then they get him to take this test thing. It's called a truth verification, but it's similar to a lie detector test, except it only evaluates the person's voice. And supposedly, the people who created this honestly piece of garbage claimed that through the voice, they could tell if somebody was lying or telling the truth. The actual fact of the matter is, a coin toss is more likely to be true than this test. So flipping a coin is going to give you a more accurate answer than this test will. But Michael at 14 has no idea. So he's told by the police, you failed this test. I don't believe he did fail this test. I don't think it matters because this test is completely useless. It doesn't prove or tell you anything. But to Michael at 14, he's like, oh, I failed this test. I watched the entire interrogation of Michael. If you want to watch it, it's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's literally him in a room, basically having a nervous breakdown forced by the police. The police are so evil in this situation. The entire interrogation, it begins and Michael is so upset because he's just lost his sister. He's just seen her dead body and he's being separated from his parents. And now he has these two police officers who are like right in his face through this interrogation. And to begin with, Michael doesn't even know how his sister died. The police have to tell him because he has no idea. And to me, it was like watching a child being abused. This interrogation, I have no other way to describe how horrific they treated this boy. At one point, they make him write a letter to his dead sister, Stephanie, apologizing for killing her. And he's saying, but I didn't kill her. If I did kill her, I don't remember it. Because the police keep saying, you killed her. And he's like, no, I didn't. You killed her. No, I didn't. Like, they were so aggressive with him. And the interrogators once in a while would leave the room and Michael would just be a puddle. He would be bawling his eyes out because this was so much more than he was even capable of handling. The amount of trauma he went through, just losing his sister, being separated by his parents, and now being abused by police officers is just absolutely horrific. And I know a lot of times people say, I would never confess to anything if I didn't do it. So first of all, he's a 14-year-old child, but also adults confess to things they didn't do all the time. And it seems hard to imagine how would you get to the point that you would actually admit to something to the police that you know you didn't do. So I'll tell you a little story. When I was 21 years old, I was questioned by the police. I had just graduated from college and I got a job working at a bank, and I didn't really plan to stay working at the bank. I was looking for a job for what I had gone to college for, but I needed a job right away to like pay my rent and stuff. So I worked at a bank, I think maybe for a couple of months, and then I got a job that I wanted. So I quit the bank job and just kind of went on with my life. And so the Toronto police contacted me and said that someone had stolen money from the bank that I had worked at and they wanted to question me. And I was like, sure, yeah, like I knew I hadn't stolen anything. I knew I had no idea what had happened. What's the harm in answering their questions? I ended up calling my dad and telling him, the police want to interview me. And he was like, you're not going alone. I'm going with you. At the time, I was 21 years old. I had just graduated college. I had lived on my own for 4 years. I was in no way some innocent, overly protected kid who didn't have much life experience. And I can tell you, being in there, so when I was questioned, it was 2 Toronto police detectives. And then there were they were 2 people from the bank. I think they were like lawyers for the bank or something. It had something to do with like the legal department. And Toronto police, they're no joke. Like if you're American, it would be like the NYPD detectives and questioning you. So they're pretty intense. And I can tell you, I'm sitting in that room and I have no idea that money was even stolen. I have no idea of who did it. I didn't do it. And I was sitting in that room and I was only in there for about an hour. And I'm telling you, it was so terrifying and so overwhelming that whenever I hear about people in these false confessions, I'm like, you know, I can see how it happens because you're at such a power imbalance. I mean, I obviously didn't end up confessing to anything because I had no idea who had even stolen the money or what they were even talking about, to be honest. But yeah, so from that experience, whenever I hear about false confessions, I'm thinking, you know, I can see how you could be intimidated into confessing. So for myself, if police ever wanted to question me, I would never answer questions without a lawyer. I don't commit crimes, so if they were questioning me, it wouldn't be something I was even guilty of doing, but I would never answer questions without a lawyer, and I don't think anybody should be. And I don't think a 14-year-old child can make the decision not to have a lawyer or to give their Miranda rights. Just to me, 14, I don't believe you can make that decision, but police disagree and they do question children without parents, without lawyers, and let them give up their Miranda rights. But that's just my opinion, that I don't agree with it. But back to the story. So then police interview 2 of Michael's friends. They interview Joshua Treadway and they also interview Aaron Hauser. Both of these boys are 15 years old and they're Michael's friends. So when they go to question Aaron, they notice that he has a collection of knives and one of those knives is missing. They then find that knife at Joshua's house. So then they decide that they're going to interrogate Joshua. Police then take Joshua to the police station and they interrogate him for 11 hours. They started the interrogation at 9 p.m. at night, so they keep him up all night long till 8 in the morning, and they are just going at him over and over. And he's like, I didn't do it. I have no idea what happened. I don't know. He just denies it and denies it. This goes on for like 11 hours. And finally at 8 a.m., they let him leave. But 2 weeks later, they bring him back. So when he goes back, he's then interrogated for 10 more hours. And he, just like Michael, is beaten down by these police officers. And he finally gives a detailed confession of what happened. He confesses that him and Aaron had helped Michael kill Stephanie. And his confession was very detailed, but none of this happened. So these 2 boys have now confessed to this. They didn't kill Stephanie. We know this for sure, that they didn't kill Stephanie. But the police are like high-fiving each other because they've now created the evidence they need to put someone away for this murder. Then they arrest the 3rd boy, Aaron. Now, he doesn't confess, but he gives them a hypothetical story of how this could have happened. The thing that had finally broken Michael to confess is the police tell Michael that his parents know that he killed his sister and his parents want nothing to do with him ever again. So this 14-year-old boy, his sister's just been murdered. He didn't kill her, but now he has the police and he thinks his parents believing that he had committed this murder. So then the police go to Steve and Cheryl, the parents, and tell them Michael confessed to killing Stephanie. The parents don't believe for a minute that Michael had done this. They knew their son. They knew that he had not committed this crime. But they now know he's confessed to it to police. And Steve, the dad, is infuriated because during those 2 days when Michael was being questioned, the parents had no idea that Michael was being questioned. The parents' understanding, based on what they were told by the police, were the two children, after the first day when they talked to all of the family, they were taken to this shelter for children, kind of like to stay at if they've been removed from their parents' homes. So the parents believe that both Michael and Shannon had been at this shelter the entire 2 days. They had no idea that the whole time the police were going and taking Michael to the police station and interrogating him. So finally, Michael is able to see his parents. He's in jail, but his parents are able to go in and visit him. And his parents are saying to him, why would you tell them that you killed your sister? Like, they know he didn't. So they're confused. They're trying to figure out, why would you tell the police this? And Michael starts explaining to the parents all of the trauma and the abuse he had suffered at the hands of these police officers. Once the parents get involved and know what's going on, all three boys recant their confessions. Now, the last one wasn't really a confession. It was more of a hypothetical way the crime could have been committed. But basically, all three boys tell their lawyers they were coerced into these confessions. All of these confessions were coerced using the Reed technique. Now, the Reed technique is a very controversial interrogation style that police sometimes use. So how the Reed technique came about was John Reed was interrogating a man, and all of the other police officers that were dealing with this case, this is a case that was years and years before any of this to do with Stephanie's murder. But John Reed interrogates this man and he confesses very quickly. And all of the other police officers are shocked because they never believed that this man would confess. And John Reed went in there and very quickly got a confession. So all of the other police are really impressed with John for getting this confession. So then John Reed is like, I'm going to brand it. So John Reed trademarks the Reed technique or some stupid shit. I don't know. So John Reed, he trademarks or whatever the hell he does, calling this the Reed technique. And he writes out how you do the interrogation and all this stuff. And for many years, this was used in a lot of cases. The problem is the Reed technique is very well known for getting false confessions. And John Reed, the confession that he got, where this whole Reed technique was created from, was a false confession. So he basically wrote a manual on how to interrogate someone because he was so successful at getting a confession. Turns out it was a false confession and the man was cleared by DNA. So there's a lot of problems with the Reed technique. A lot of police officers don't use it because they know how likely it is to get false confessions from it. And the people most likely to falsely confess when the Reid technique is being used is minors, in this case, people who English is their second language, or an adult that has any type of learning disability or mental delay. So it's highly probable that being used on anyone will create a false confession. But minors specifically are even a higher percentage that you're going to get a false confession. And that's exactly what happened in this case. They used the Reid technique and they got false confessions. So finally it goes before a judge because it's clear as day that these are not real confessions. These are coerced confessions, and the judge throws out 2 of them. But Joshua, one of the boys that was 15, he had actually confessed twice. So one of his confessions was thrown out, but one of them was not. So even though 2 of the confessions were thrown out, the 3 boys were charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and they were going to be tried as adults. The 3 boys were incarcerated for 6 months while the prosecution and the defense prepared to go to trial. But then the thorn in the side of the Reid technique, DNA, changes everything. So when Richard Raymond, the homeless man who had tried to get into people's homes the night of the murder, when the police had interviewed him very quickly for 30 minutes, they took his clothing and DNA of Stephanie's blood was found on Richard Raymond's shirt that he was wearing. So you think, okay, we've now got DNA. We know that these are false confessions. Maybe the legal troubles for these boys is over. No, the charges do get dropped, but they get dropped without prejudice. So what that means, if you don't know, if you're watching this channel, you probably know, but in case if you don't, basically, if the charges are dropped without prejudice, it means that the police can recharge them at any time. So it's kind of like having this lingering thought that the police at any point can come and rearrest and start going through this whole thing again. The police don't charge Richard Raymond with anything. Richard Raymond had been in the area trying to get into people's homes. He was there around the time that the murder happened. He had Stephanie's blood on his shirt, but the police and the district attorney were so embarrassed by how much they had screwed up this case. They did absolutely nothing for 2 years. This family lost Stephanie. Then they had to have their son Michael go through such a traumatic experience. And the police really don't seem interested in arresting anyone for Stephanie's murder. Then finally, in May 2002, Richard Raymond was charged with Stephanie's murder. On the first day of jury selection, during their lunch break, Richard Raymond is handcuffed and he's being held in an area until they're going to continue with the court proceedings. He somehow manages to get his handcuffs off and he flees the courthouse like Ted Bundy style and takes off. And it doesn't surprise me because the incompetence of everyone involved in this case is so ridiculous, and it is beyond ridiculous. So he manages to get on a bus, but he's found within a few hours and brought back, and now they secure him so he can't run away. So then they end up going through trial, and on May 26th, 2004, the jury acquitted Richard Raymond of murder, but found him guilty of manslaughter. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison for Stephanie's murder, and then he was given an additional 5 years for his Little Bundy escape. The family of the 3 boys sues the city of Escondido and Oceanside. In 2011, the Crowe family, who is Stephanie's family, they reach a settlement for $7.25 million. Then finally, in 2012, the boys are found factually innocent and all charges are permanently dropped against them. So you think that's the end of the story, right? No. Richard Raymond's conviction gets overturned. The judge in Richard Raymond's case had committed a constitutional error in limiting cross-examination in his trial. So his conviction is overturned. So not only are the police in this case incompetent, the DA is incompetent, and apparently even the judge is incompetent. They decide to try Richard Raymond again, and they have another trial, but he is found not guilty. The jury was interviewed after they had found him not guilty, and basically the problem was, the biggest piece of evidence was obviously the blood. Stephanie's blood is on his shirt and DNA proved it. So that's obviously the biggest piece of evidence. But the defense was also able to show how incompetent the police were for the majority of the handling of this case. So in the jury's mind, they know the police are incompetent. So when the defense says, well, how do we know that this DNA evidence wasn't contaminated? So the defense makes the point that the police were so incompetent in handling this case. How do we know there wasn't cross-contamination? How do we know the evidence was handled correctly? Because if I was sitting on that jury and found out how the police had handled this case, I would doubt them. So I can understand how a jury really couldn't find him guilty because the police were just that bad. No one is in prison for Stephanie's murder. And I know in this story, Stephanie kind of seems to get lost because of everything that the family goes through. But Stephanie was a sweet, wonderful, amazing 12-year-old girl. She loved the Spice Girls. She sang in her church choir, and she used to volunteer at the library. So she was just a bright, beautiful young girl who never got justice because the police couldn't do their job. So while I was researching this story, one police officer early on in the case made a statement saying this isn't going to be another JonBenet Ramsey because this case took place 2 years after JonBenet Ramsey. And obviously we all know what happened with that. But the police officer from the very beginning said, this isn't going to be a JonBenet Ramsey case. We're going to find out who did this. And they didn't seem to care if they caught the right person. They just wanted someone guilty in jail. It didn't actually matter who committed the murder. They just wanted the murder solved. And unfortunately, it's a lot like the JonBenet Ramsey case. There's no resolution. No one paid for Stephanie's murder. And it's all because of police incompetence. So that is the end of today's story. I hope that you enjoyed the video. I want to say a huge thank you to all of my returning subscribers who come back and watch each and every video, who comment and like the video. I really, really appreciate you guys, and I'm so excited about the channel growing and everything that's happening. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you because I wouldn't be able to do it without you. So let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on this case. Have you heard of it? What's your opinion? I'd love to hear it all. We'll get into it in the comment section and discuss everyone's opinions. And if you'd like to support the channel, please stick around and watch another video, and I will see you in the next one.